UK and how I think it has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up. But you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna start my own nation with myself and reservation. I'm gonna start my own nation with myself and reservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
And welcome everybody. At the moment, there's only one person on the Restream chat, so I'm going to talk to all you people who are listening to this on the podcast. And welcome for tuning into our podcast. We're very pleased to be talking to you, and thank you for listening to us. A couple of weeks ago, you'll remember that I suggested that we needed a name for you. Like Rutherford and Fry on Radio 4, they call their listeners the Curios, because it's the curious cases of Rutherford and sort of, I suggested get in touch with me and suggest a name. And I have to tell you that I've had a sum total of 0 suggestions. So apparently a tanky is a very extreme communist who believes in sort of world domination, so we can't have that. And sort of a thinker or a socialist. Well, they're taken, aren't they? So I'm going to copy.
That's why I said it, John, because I was saying the Labour right will refer to us as tankies.
Well, yes, they already think we are, but there's no reason to play into their hands. So I'm going to be calling you the Politicos. Hiya, Politicos. It's so good to speak to you from now and until you choose yourself a better name. And so welcome to the Politicos who are beginning to arrive. Hiya, Jacqueline. It's great to speak to you. To see you, Mark. Hello. And anyway, there we go. Somebody else who's
just call him Toto. That's the easiest way.
Toto. The thing is that in order to get all the things on the screen, I have to have them so small that I can't read the names. It's just, there you go. And welcome to the show. Welcome to my 3 guests. Just say hello, Paul Daly.
Hello.
Paul's the boss. He's just great, is Paul. We all think he's fantastic. And then welcome, Jane.
Hello.
Jane's so clever and she knows so much. It terrifies me. And then Neil. Hiya.
Hi everyone. How are you?
Neil is our political extremist. He's going to a demonstration next week. Wages, not war. I mean, how more extreme can you get than that? Sort of a complete idealist. It's great to have you on the programme. And let's go to the first thing. Because you're our idealist, Neil, our thinker, our stander up for the principles of good versus evil, it's your moment of the week.
Well, today is the 21st of March, which is the UN Day of Anti-Racism. And if you've got my activist calendar for this year, it's already in there for you. And as part of that, over the weekend, there was major demonstrations in London, Glasgow, and Cardiff, as well as other cities around the world, to mark the UN Day of Anti-Racism, which comes at a really good time as well, because, of course, with the Rwanda policy over here and the constant dog whistle politics to try and get the government off the hook by scapegoating refugees, etc., it's needed more than ever. And whilst those demonstrations were taking place, the fascist organisation Patriotic Alternative decided to target Hull for the I think 4th time they've been there, and in order to spread their messages of hate, division, and anger at people that aren't responsible for any of the problems that they face. But anyway, so a group of groups came together to have a counter protest against them, where they occupied the Queen Victoria statue square in Hull, which the far right were going to use as their stage, but we occupied it throughout, putting them to the other side of the square. And the leader of the Patriotic Alternative, who looks very much like a young Hitler, was forced to speak from a bench. And even when he was stood on the bench, he was no taller than me when I was stood on the floor. But the thing that I loved about it was a photograph taken by a friend of mine called Jason, where the leader of Patriotic Alternative, whatever his bloody name is, was speaking on this bench, with the guy stood on the far side of the bench holding up a flag saying Antifa. In other words, no, they're not intelligent enough to write pro-fascist, but that's what that means. With I think it was 4 people in the middle sat eating fish and chips, so just like, well, we don't really care about fascism, we just want fish and chips, and it just completely, it's one picture where the juxtaposition of it just shows that, do you know what, your message ain't welcome here, just by these people sat there just blatantly eating fish and chips. They weren't part of this demonstration, they were just sat there wanting their patty and chips, which people from Hull will know what patty and chips is. And that picture in particular was my moment of the week, and it's a photo that isn't mine, it was Jason Shipley's, but it's well worth having a look at.
Those of us who've done that know that it's not quite the jolly. It can be very intimidating and threatening and stressful. So thank you very much.
It is. I mean, a few years ago, I was followed home by the far right and received death threats. Yes. So it's it's something that my anxiety is sky high whenever I'm anywhere near them for that. But the event was well organised, and everyone's safety and welfare was taken into consideration by the organisers, who made sure that everyone got out and got home safely. Much to their praise, it was very well organised.
Thank you, and thank you for what you did. Who am I going to get next? Jane, let's get you. Moment of your week.
So my moment of the week, I feel mean saying this, but it's how I really feel. My moment of the week was Fiona Bruce stepping down as an ambassador for refuge. And the reason why she did it should have been my moment of the week last week, because on the BBC Question Time show, and she was very probably directed by a producer, and these probably weren't her choice of words, but that in defence of Stanley Johnson's ex-wife's allegations that he had punched her and broken her nose, that it was over off. And I didn't have it as my moment of the week last week, that incident, because I was so very angry that I couldn't speak about it in a way that I thought was acceptable to speak about it in public. But I've worked through the anger of that now, and I'm glad that she has stepped down as an ambassador for refuge. I was really disappointed by the response of both Refuge and the BBC in their statements around that incident, and I think it's the right thing to do that she no longer represents that charity.
Thank you very much indeed. Presumably you don't support him getting a knighthood either then?
It's the more you find out about Mr. Johnson, the more outraged I feel that he could possibly be considered for knighthood. I really don't feel he should get one.
As a school teacher, we often used to find that if you were worried about a child's behaviour, all you needed to do was to meet the parents. I think this is one of those situations, isn't it? Thank you, Jane. Very disappointing and sad, really. Paul, moment of your week. Now, I know you've got 2, so you can share them, but you've not got long.
I was only going to do one, to be honest. Like, I've got loads that I could do, but I'm just going to go for the Andrea Gilbert one, which has been popping up in the chat quite a lot. Andrea's a friend of ours. I met her at the World Transformed this year. Absolutely lovely person. Worked for homeless charities, was selected as a Labour Party candidate until she was expelled from the Labour Party, which, you know, fits in with what we're talking about in the middle, for doing an article in a newspaper or a magazine that was associated with a group that was not prescribed at the time by the Labour Party, but was subsequently later on prescribed. And because she'd had an article printed in there, she was expelled from the Labour Party, even though she'd been selected as a council candidate. And, it's just that classic Keir Starmer thing, if you're left wing, we'll get rid of you, especially if you're black. Andrea is now facing real financial hardship, and there's been a GoFundMe crowdfunder put up for her, which has already hit its initial target, which is really, really good. Lovely to see the solidarity, but she deserves it. And, she's done this kind of work for other people in the past. And it's a terrible, horrible irony that she's facing this situation at the minute. So solidarity to Andrea. I'm sorry, she'll be probably a little bit embarrassed for me to go on like this, but she's absolutely just a lovely, lovely person, and she deserves all our solidarity.
If you're listening, Andrea, God bless you. We're on your side.
We love you, Andrea.
The other thing I will point out is that, these things that people do unfairly to you. I was contacted on Facebook today by somebody telling a completely different story about a completely different situation, but an unfair and unjustified accusation followed by repercussions which just destroyed his life. And and now there's no justice, there's no going back, there's no justice against the perpetrators, and you just think that person's life was ruined by that unfair situation. And so, Andrew, we're solidarity. God bless you. Let's move on.
Now it's time for the big story.
I promised you this last week, didn't I? That the big story was going to be the budget. And let's start with Neil. The budget, we all said what we wanted to be in it. Nothing of what we wanted to be in it was in it. But let's talk about the budget we got, not the budget we wanted. Jeremy Hunt said it was a budget for work. Rachel Reeves says that people and businesses had been put at the bottom of the pile. Which of them was right, Neil?
Yeah, Wood and Rachel Reeves saying that business is at the bottom of the pile. I fail to see how business is at the bottom of the pile. I think workers are at the bottom of the pile, and the more vulnerable worker you are, the more bottom you are. Now, I'm not going to go through everything that's in the budget. I think there's plenty out there. I'm going to pick three things that are in the budget. Then actually, it's more important about what isn't in the budget. So the top three things for me that I think were in the budget that really explain what the budget is. First of all, one thing that a lot of people are calling for is an increase in corporation tax, which is going back up to 25%. However, there's going to be a new policy called full capital expensing, which will be over the next 3 years. And basically what that is for every pound that a company that pays corporation tax invests in IT equipment or plant machinery, it can be deducted immediately from their profits. In other words, that for the biggest companies, which will probably be investing in that anyway, basically that's going to be offset. Now that's an important thing for business. Now, in terms of for the poorest workers,
stop, Neil. So is that not a good thing? Is that not going to encourage investment?
But good businesses invest anyway, don't they?
Yeah, but I mean, is this not going to encourage? Sort of basically, if they can write it off against tax, it puts more money in their pockets to spend on investment.
I'm not sure. I mean, we've got the lowest corporation tax in the world anyway, and there's no evidence that lower corporation tax leads to more investment. I mean, I'm not sure what the. I can't answer that honestly. If I'm honest with you, I don't know. Another thing that was announced was that so as part of the budget, it's going to be people on universal credit are going to be sanctioned under a harsher regime, because, of course, they need that encouragement. See, big businesses and wealthy people are getting tax breaks. The poor are getting punishments. And let's not forget, 60% of people on universal credits are in work anyway.
You know,
But of
Neil,
course,
I always think that's exactly the opposite. Sort of, if you've got so much money, you don't know what to do with it. Giving you more money is not going to be an incentive to work harder or do better. You've already got enough. I'm going to ask you about the pensions tax breaking it tomorrow, but sort of, I mean, giving people who are going to have a huge pension the opportunity to have a huger pension isn't going to stop them retiring early.
I'm talking about people on universal credit.
People who are poor, giving them the opportunity to earn a bit more money and get out of their poverty, that's going to be a huge incentive. And I agree with you. I've never managed to understand this thing that we sanction the poor and we give more money to the rich. I think it's a trick.
Well, what it's going to do as well is, so those that are not fully employed, is what the government says, is going to have more intensive work coach support. Exactly what support is, I'm not quite sure. When it comes to the threat of sanction, I'm not sure how much support that really is. But of course, through that, there's many people on universal credit who are carers, unpaid carers, for example, that have been completely ignored in all of this. And not only that as well, but also through that, they're going to be forcing more disabled people back into work, which, that really alarms me, because, a lot of workplaces are not set up for disabled people. We have a really bad way in society of treating people with disabilities, so forcing them back into the workplace when it might not be a good thing for them nor the employer isn't a particularly good thing. And I'm not speaking on behalf of disabled people here, but the likes of Disabled People Against the Cuts have been very outspoken about this idea and how it is actually very, very regressive policy. And I'm in full solidarity with them. And the big thing out of the hat that was pulled out was the government. Well, there's two big things. One was the childcare offer, which isn't going to be implemented until next September. And I'll come on to why I think that is in a minute. Where the tax breaks are from next month, but this childcare offer isn't until next year. Well, a year and a half away, actually. But so any child over the age of 9 months will be entitled to 30 hours of free childcare. But of course, it doesn't come with the money that's needed to fund that. Even if it was coming in this year, it wouldn't have the money needed to fund it. So by the time it comes to next year, it's going to be even worse. But I think the reason why it was announced that it's going to happen next year is because next May is likely to be a general election. So it's a little carrot to dangle over voters. And that's the bit that I think everybody's missed in that announcement, is that it's after the general election. It's not. They could put it in this year and then use it next year and say, look, we introduced this. How well is it going? Vote for us. But no, it's after the election, so they can put it in the manifesto and say, we've promised it. Oh, if you vote for Labour, you won't get it. Even though Labour in the last general election had a universal healthcare, universal education system, which would have been far better. So. But I think it's important to look at what wasn't announced in the budget as well. There was nothing for the NHS, nothing for social care, nothing for local governments, there was nothing for the education system, nothing for workers, so nothing to settle the pay disputes that are currently underway. There was nothing for our public services whatsoever within that budget. In fact, the NHS wasn't mentioned at all in that budget statement by Jeremy Hunt. It wasn't announced. Nothing was announced by him at all. So basically, it's a typical Tory budget. We're giving money to the rich and we're taking it from the poor. And what this budget is about punishing the poor for that mini budget by Kwasi Kwarteng from last year. That's what this budget is really about.
Thank you, Neil. That's I'm going to finish on there because it's going to be a brilliant soundbite for the clips that we show. Paul, just picking up on what Neil was saying there. I mean, it was in the newspaper that this was Jeremy Hunt called it a budget for work. but other people have been calling it the pay more, get less budget. I mean, do you agree with Neil that basically it was a pension to take money away from the poor and to give it to the rich?
I think it was an economically illiterate budget, based upon the long-running notion that we've got that we're somehow like a household, which is completely preposterous. We're not anything like a household. We're a nation. You print your own money. Like, if you could print your own money to pay your own bills in a household, then yeah, the analogy would be fine. But it's not like that at all. They're talking about like balancing the tax, but basically what we need to think of is when they're increasing taxes on ordinary workers like they are, the tax burden's incredibly high at the moment. But then you're also like, they have increased corporation tax, which is kind of okay, but that's probably only going to affect people, the kind of people who pay corporation tax that don't have as much money, because there are so many tax loopholes to get out of it. Basically what they're doing is they're saying there's too much money there. There's too much money in your pocket, so I'm going to tax you more. There's too much money in business, so I'm going to tax you more. What we really should be doing is looking, if we're looking to redistribute wealth, we need to be looking at actually taxing wealth. If people have got too much sitting around in bank accounts or in land or whatever, tax that, because that is the only way that their household analogy makes any sense. Because they're going on a tax and spend model as if you have to tax before you can spend. If that were true, they'd be going after wealth, because they'd be going after money that was already there, not taxing income. Income doesn't exist yet, does it? Future income doesn't exist yet, but wealth does. So if you're going to tax and then spend, the only logical way to do that would be to tax wealth and then to spend that money. Now, we know it's not tax and spend. We know that's not the correct analogy. But their own internal logic doesn't even work here. So, as I say, it's an economically illiterate budget. I think they believe in the economic illiteracy that they espouse. I think they truly don't understand what is going on with budgets at all, which is why we're in such a mess and have progressively, with a number of governments, been in this similar kind of mess.
Thank you very much indeed. So you agree with Rachel Reeves that they've got their priorities wrong? I love it. I love taunting Paul because he hates this Labour shadow cabinet. So I'll try and get him to agree with one of them. You would agree with Rachel Reeves on that, wouldn't you?
I probably agree for different reasons. So they have got the priorities wrong. The problem with Rachel Reeves and the people who believe in what she believes in, she actually believes in the establishment. She believes these economic illiteracies as well. She espouses them. She talks about them all the time. The difference is she thinks that by being moderately working class and getting to university, she should have the keys to the kingdom. So what they're against, what the Labour cabinet are against, are the posh. So they think posh people shouldn't control the world. They don't think there's anything wrong with the system. They think the problem is the people who are in charge of the system. Whereas we tend to think, well, there's a problem with the poshos being in charge of everything, and there's a problem with the system. And that's where, like, I would say the Labour right and the Labour left have a huge disagreement. Like, we want systemic change. Not that I'm in the Labour left anymore, the left in general, and I don't know how many of the Labour left are in Labour anymore.
How many of the left?
but they just want the status quo. They just want to be in charge of the awful status quo. We want rid of the status quo.
Thank you. And there's another wonderful sound bite. The sort of Laura, who edits these things, sort of a really good definition of what we're about. We're having some lovely comments on this this stream. Jacqueline Hemmings, we must have you on the show, Jacqueline. You come up with so many bon mots. She says, what's the point in having more investment if normal workers never seem to get the benefit of it? And that's just exactly what I think, Jacqueline. You've hit the nail on it. What's the point of these companies doing well if these things don't end up in us doing well as well? Jacqueline Hemmings also comments, isn't there a worry that employers will be more likely to employ those with more visible disabilities just for the optics? That's always been the case. And the sort of invisible disabilities is a big issue. Neil Fairburn, God bless you, Neil. I love this comment as well. Tories hate that there are 9 million people economically inactive. They are desperate to get people back into work. Spot on. How dare you not be working so we can get rich? That's what lies behind this budget altogether. Fantastic, Neil. Control data. Yes, the modern monetary theory analysis is the way to look at this. Increasingly, people are talking about modern monetary theory, and it's worth going into. We might have a topic on that sometime. It's important.
We've done one.
We've
done one on Socialist Night Live with the Modern Monetary Theory podcast, which is really good. So.
Perhaps if somebody's listening, they can put the link to that onto the stream. That would be good. Control data. Reeves' fiscal rules are a way to deny progressive policies. That's an interesting character as well. Can you unpack that for us a bit, control data? And
I think I know what
Hemmings
they
wants to
mean.
see. Sorry?
I think they know what I mean. Like Labour have put these fiscal controls and they're basically saying, oh, we won't pay for anything other than infrastructure. So like, let's say teachers' wages can't be paid with a deficit. So it's buying into that economic illiteracy. John McDonnell did it as well, which is economically illiterate. It was like, well, we might spend some money, we might invest some money, but only if it's going to give us a return. But like, again, it's buying into that, oh yeah, well, you know, if you're going to get more money back, we'll stick that on the credit card. But that's not how budgets work, you know, like you can just put more money in to incentivize work. That's something that you can do. If they put more money into the likes of teachers, into the likes of nurses, if they had more money, they'll spend it locally in their local economy. But Labour want to appear fiscally credible, so they'll buy into this narrative of a complete nonsense with regards to economics, like economic literacy, in order to appeal to Tory voters who believe in the nonsense. So it's like, you know, it's like going on about the tooth fairy, like, yes, the tooth fairy will pay £1.50 under Labour, or something like that. It's just nonsense. It's just a very silly thing that they feel that they need to do because some people believe in a tooth fairy.
Thank you. Just very briefly, Neil, sort of raise yourself up a bit. Jacqueline wants to see your T-shirt, Headscarf Pride. Tell me about Headscarf Pride, briefly.
Yep, it's 4 women from Hull in the late 1960s, 1968, who campaigned for trawler safety in Hull following the triple trawler disaster, which lost 68 men in a space of 3 weeks. They started a petition, and within, I think it was a month, they got a meeting with the government and changed the laws, which then went on to, no doubt, save thousands of lives. Look on their Facebook page, plenty of information. They're currently Headscarf Pride are fundraising for a statue for the 4 women, led by Lillian Balocca,
Thank you.
a true working class hero.
Lovely. Trying to push things on. Jane, last thing, was there anything good in this budget? Was there anything? Because you know, sometimes you got to be reasonable. Was there anything that you looked at and you thought, actually, that's not so bad? I'm glad he's done that.
There's some bits that weren't good enough, but they were more than I had expected. So I hate the word benefits. I don't think benefits should be called benefits. That's not what they are. We'll be increasing by 10.1% in April, which isn't enough, but it's better than I had expected from this government. And there's, I think, a tiny little amount, 33 million, I think, for housing for veterans, which is good, but completely ignores the huge housing crisis that we have in this country. Nothing for insulated housing. So the tiny little scraps of goodness in there, like the awfulness. And obviously the pensions, the fact that they've tried to pass this off as some sort of attempt to bring people back into the National Health Service, which is ridiculous. Abolishing the lifetime allowance of over £1 million you can put into a pension. If people are retiring because they can only save £1 million tax-free into their pension, you know, if you've got £1 million in your pension pot, you probably don't need to worry about working. So, and the annual allowance increase, allowing people to put I think 60,000 instead of 40,000 into their pension tax free. Again, if you can afford to put that much money into your pension, you're probably not one of the workers anyway. I would say, who's on the ground nursing people in
Energy
hospitals.
price guarantee, Jane. Energy price guarantee continued.
Yes, well, sold as a good thing, but the reality is that everyone's bills will go up by £67 a month from next month, and that already we're facing doubled bills in compared to April 2021, 2 years ago, with the prospect of them going up even further. Summer possibly. Is absolutely outrageous that they can try and sell this off as some sort of success story. It's horrendous, paying 4 times as much as a lot of other countries in Europe. It's just completely unjustifiable.
It doesn't fix anything structural, does it?
Sorry, Neil.
It doesn't fix anything structural about our energy markets and how we're at the mercy of the markets.
I've been going mad on Facebook today about the way that electricity prices are fixed. It's a fix. It's not a cartel, but it might as well be. One last thing, Jane, before I move on. Scrapping the work capability assessment, good or bad?
Hopefully a good thing, but very well respected charities like the Joseph Foundry Foundation have already come out and voiced their concerns about the potential impact of this, and the worries about people being forced back into work or left in destitution as a result of this being implemented badly. And going on this government's track record, I share their concerns.
Thank you. Just as a comment before I move on to the next section of the show, everybody. Don't you find out some stuff from this programme? Aren't these people clever? Don't they know some stuff? They always come out with stuff and I think, I didn't know that. They speak with authority, not as the scribes. Absolutely brilliant. Paul, let's see what else we got. Oh, this goes back and it's just so annoying. And I'm just going to give Paul an opportunity to rant. Forde's been in the news this week. He's ranting. He's going mad about it. Paul, tell us all about it. And I want to know, why has he spoken out in this way?
Okay, so we've had a long time to look at this, a long time to think about this. Basically, everyone knows about everything that's happened in the Labour Party over the last few years. There's been some allegations of anti-Semitism and other things, and there were accusations that the Labour Party staff were working against the Labour Party victory in 2017 and 2019. So the people who had whilst Jeremy Corbyn was leader, there were people who were working against the Labour victory from within. And this resulted in a leaked report that detailed all of these things. There were a load of WhatsApp messages where there was a lot of racism from the members of staff on the Labour Party. So these would be the people who would be loyal to Keir Starmer now, saying like absolutely dreadful things about the likes of Diane Abbott or Dawn Butler. And this leaked report came out kind of in response to the EHRC, that's right, isn't it? EHRC report into the Labour Party, which said that the Labour Party had broken the law on 2 occasions, where I think the 2 occasions were when individuals were seen as being agents of the party. So 2 people who'd acted on their own had acted apparently on behalf of the Labour Party, despite the fact they were acting in a personal capacity. So the Labour Party did break the law on anti-Semitism on 2 occasions. It was individuals, but the whole party was held responsible under Jeremy Corbyn. So anyway, we have these 2 conflicting reports where we have the Labour Party on one side being like people saying that under Jeremy Corbyn it became a hive of anti-Semitism, and on the other side people saying actually it's not like that. The complaint system's been undermined by people who are working for the Labour Party, and and those people who are working for the Labour Party are trying to make sure that the Labour Party lose, and they are also, some of them, like very racist and saying horrible things about MPs and things like that. So anyway, Keir Starmer wanted to put this issue to bed, so he hired someone who he respected, Martin Forde. At the time he was a QC, and he's now a KC, obviously, because there's now a king rather than a queen, to do a report into what had happened during that time. And many people on the left thought that it would be a bit of a whitewash, but it wasn't. Turned out that there were, like, whilst Martin Forde said that there was factionalism that was dictating everything, the right of the Labour Party did not look very good at all. He did describe some things that looked like there could be a hierarchy of racism, where some forms of racism were treated as more important than others, rather than all forms of racism being treated equally. Now, this has been met in all sorts of different ways. Now, what this isn't saying is that anti-Semitism isn't important. What it was saying is, whilst this anti-Semitism crisis was going on, every other form of racism was apparently being ignored by the Labour Party. And then they looked into what people said, and it did not look very good for the staff of the Labour Party. And it looked like, okay, right, there might be some sort of balanced thing coming out of this. It does kind of, both sides claimed it as a vindication almost, like there was something in it for both. And then, because of that, it appears Keir Starmer has entirely ignored it, to the point now where Martin Forde's had to come out this week and go on Al Jazeera and say, I really don't know why I'm being ignored here. I don't know why I was commissioned to do this report, but then I never went to the Labour's National Executive Committee. I never, like, Labour aren't implementing any of the recommendations that I am doing. Meanwhile, you've got the AHRC saying that Labour have now passed out of this phase of being anti-Semitic and everything's fine and everything's great, despite the fact that people who make those decisions on the AHRC have very, very questionable equality issues, backgrounds. Like some of them have been accused of things themselves. And there are complaints about what the AHRC is itself. So there's this whole mess of factionalism. Martin Forde has said, this needs to end. And it isn't ending. It's been ramped up. And Keir Starmer seems to want to get rid of anyone who's ever had a left-wing idea or a left-wing thought in their life from the Labour Party, in order that his faction rules the Labour Party, is king of the ashes, does nothing with the party other than retain the status quo. So if you...
Before I move on, Paul, I mean, has he wasted his breath? Has he basically just set himself up for a bruising? Or do you think there'll be any effect from what he's done?
Martin Forde?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think he's done everything. I think he's acted in good faith, and I think the problem is here that Keir Starmer never does. Keir Starmer is not a good faith actor. Like, if you look at Keir Starmer's track record, it is pretty appalling in everything that he's ever done. As leader of the Labour Party, he has just kind of brushed this under the carpet and pretended that he's solved everything, when really he's just created a factional war. He's brought back people like Peter Mandelson, who's incredibly unpopular within the Labour Party and outside of it. He was close to Jeffrey Epstein. He's brought these people into the Labour Party. It's the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, which could have been any of our moments of the week, which we probably should have mentioned, where, arguably people, Blair, Brown, those people, Alistair Campbell should have been in The Hague But this week, you know, you're seeing Alistair Campbell rehabilitated. Oh, yes, I was great and stuff like that after he did his sexed up dossier and so on, allegedly. So, yeah, he has been wasting his time. But look at Starmer's track record, even when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. Look at Ian Tomlinson, who was unlawfully killed by the police. And he chose not to do anything about that. Like, that's the kind of guy he is. John Charles de Menezes, nothing happened. But what did happen? Talk about the Iraq War. Who's in prison on Starmer's watch? Assange. Julian Assange. That's the kind of person that Keir Starmer is. He's talking this week about the Met and all the problems that are in the Met. Again, this could have been a huge story that we talked about this week, but there are just so many going on. The Met's been found to be institutionally racist. And he's like, oh, under Labour it'll be all different. When this all happened, when Sarah Everard was murdered and the police came out and attacked the people who were protesting against it, Starmer defended Cressida Dick, said she's absolutely brilliant. You know, like.
Thank you. I'm going to end it.
I just want to mention one more person as well.
Yeah,
Gary McKinnon. Gary McKinnon as well. Look into Starmer's record on Gary McKinnon.
I'll just correct you on one thing. It wasn't a protest. It was a vigil.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, please.
Outrageous.
Yeah, I'm happy to be corrected. We'll correct the record on that one.
Yeah, just completely wrong. And I totally agree with everything you say. I'd like to come back though to the Forde report and sort of now Jane, when they were sort of responding to what Forde had said, which was really a damning criticism of the Labour leadership, the Labour leadership says that Starmer is, quote, ridding the party of the destructive factionalism and unacceptable culture that did so much damage previously. Comment.
It's very 1984, isn't it? It's a very disingenuous comment. It's the exact opposite happening. I feel that the leadership of the Labour Party is driving the most terrible, nasty, dishonest factionalism, driving people out of the party for no apparent reason other, as Paul said, that they lean slightly towards the left. They don't pose any threat to the party or the leadership. When we all know that when Jeremy Corbyn took on the leadership of the party, he put together a cabinet of people from across different sections of the party, overwhelmingly actually not of the left. He wanted to work with other people, and that's my experience of being on the left of the Labour Party, that we all just wanted a Labour government, and I don't understand where the absolute, it feels, hatred towards people who wanted to try so hard to work together to achieve something good has come from.
Thank you very much indeed. Cow Daily, it's all one big club and we aren't invited. Spot on. Neil, just briefly, because I do want to move on to our last question at 1:45. Momentum have recently been published in Labour List, which is going to get itself prescribed if it's not careful. It's turned very lefty at the moment. But sort of Momentum, they go absolutely apeshit about what Starmer is doing. They're very critical of Starmer, but they say they're going to stay in the party. What the anti-democratic clique at the top of the party want gone are our values: public ownership, class politics, and migrant justice. But we will not allow ourselves to be driven out of Britain's public sphere. Instead, we're getting organised at the grassroots. Have Momentum got it right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not a particular fan of Momentum. I'll put that on record. But I do think they've got this one right. I'd far rather before start the party rather than voluntarily leave. Even though I did voluntarily leave the Labour Party, but that was because of local politics, not because of what was happening nationally. But I think they're right. I think, you know, what are Labour standing for at the moment? They're standing for the exact same things as the Tories are. They're fighting for the exact same voters. They're fighting to prop up the same broken system. Whereas in 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn, we were looking to change that. We were wanting a different system. We didn't just want a different government, we wanted a different system. And that's what scared them so much. And that was why they came up with everything that they could in order to bring Corbyn and his supporters down. so that we'd end up with this watered down version. I mean, question time last week, the Westminster leader of the SNP called Keir Starmer David Cameron in a red tie. I think that's exactly what we've got, and so I actually respect Momentum for saying that we're not going to be driven out. We are going to try and make a change. I don't think they'll achieve it. I think I agree with you. I think they will end up being prescribed, but you might as well keep your hand in there for the moment and see what happens.
Let the buggers win. I knew you'd want to come back, Paul. Very quickly, a last comment.
Just there's a really important comment in the chat. Janet Silver, she says, I think Forde has changed his stance somewhat since he watched the Labour files. As a left-wing Jew, I appreciate what he's saying, that Jews are not homogenous and all voices should be heard, which of course won't happen. Now, I think that the people who have been treated really incredibly badly throughout this anti-Semitism crisis, and the people who have been treated with utter appalling anti-Semitism, are left-wing Jews. They're the ones who've had their voices silenced. The people without power, who are Jewish people who are on the left, are expected to be a certain way and are being told so. I just wanted to promote Janet's voice there because I think they're the voices that deserve to be promoted. They've been utterly stifled by the anti-Semitism of Starmer's Labour Party. Really bad.
Absolutely
stuff.
Agree. Absolutely spot on.
Any time any left-wing Jew wants to use Socialist Think Tank as a platform for themselves, please do. You can have it. Do whatever you want with it. So please do.
Yes, a form of racism. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Jacqueline Hemmings, surely any MP on the left who isn't in the SCG has got to be feeling very uncomfortable about what's happening, and we all are. It's whether we leave or not, which is the issue. Last question of all. Meetings this week between Putin and Xi Jinping. Jane, let's start with the positive. Do you think that there's a chance of peace? I mean, China went there saying that they were going to try and do something to promote peace. They published their 12 principles, which were damn good, quite frankly. We would agree as socialists with a lot of what they were saying. Do you think that meeting will bring peace?
I'm not sure that it will bring peace, but I think it will potentially do less damage than the belligerent manner of some of the Western countries. And I don't mean that in an insulting way to Ukraine in any way. This is absolutely a war of aggression. Russia has come onto Ukrainian territory and committed horrific acts against the Ukrainian people. However, I think we need to look at a peaceful solution to this to stop more Ukrainian people dying. And some of the talk from some of the Western leaders, including ministers within our own governments, I think some of the things that Liz Truss said when she was in the cabinet, riled some very worrying comments. And in the end, this country, Russia, has nuclear weapons that can be deployed if Putin chooses to do that, or if his government chooses to do that. And I thought that China made a very fair point when they said that the International Criminal Court needs to avoid politicization and double standards in this situation. And I think it's very difficult when you're on the left, because I think for most of us on the left, or a lot of us on the left, when someone asks, what do you think about this arrest warrant for Putin? It's very difficult to respond to what you think about the arrest warrant for Putin without bringing into the question what you think about the fact that there isn't an arrest warrant for certain other Western leaders, and that there hasn't been. Trump's administration imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court investigators for looking into crimes against humanity committed by American forces in Afghanistan and at CIA interrogation facilities abroad. The United States has known, many respected charities have published the fact that America is using drones in territories that aren't their own to kill people, trial, mistaken identity, to just summarily kill someone with a drone. And if Putin was doing something like that, we'd all want him on, we'd all at The Hague for it. But neither America nor the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. And in fact, neither does the Ukraine, which is the reason why Putin can't be prosecuted for crimes of aggression in the Ukraine. Although he has now been had these charges brought against him for ordering the illegal deportation of children from the occupied territories. So this is a really complex subject. Obviously, the fact that what Putin's doing and what his government is doing is very wrong isn't complicated at all. And yes, this should be recognised and there should be accountability for this. But what's deeply concerning is that there are not accountability for a huge amount of other of crimes against humanity that are being committed by other leaders who are standing up and, you know, claiming to be whiter than white against the bad things that Putin are doing. Assange, as Paul said, is sitting in jail, dying a slow death effectively by the American government, and Guantanamo Bay is still open, and I think less than 10 of the people in there actually know what they've been charged with. There are people who've been in there for decades being tortured who were picked up on a case of mistaken identity, and even though the American authorities realised that, still kept them in that camp for decades and tortured them. So I'm very confused as to why there's not international outrage and an arrest warrant regarding those crimes.
Yes, well said. I was just following on what you said, because you moved on to it. I was going to ask you to comment on it, but I thought it was relevant. The Chinese promised to defend the UN-centric international system, stand guard over the world based on international law. And that's not the picture that the West is trying to portray of what is going on. And I was very interested as well that the Ukraine welcomed the Chinese principles for peace. It was their allies, the EU and the US, who sort of found fault with them, or criticised them. Very, very interesting response. Neil, do we need to fear? I was asked Jane whether we need to welcome the involvement of China. The other question is, do we need to fear a Russia-China alliance? That was basically the theme of the BBC News yesterday.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, we need to fear China, you know, because they actually have a system that is different to ours, where you know, where they're lifting people out of poverty rather than impoverishing them in order to create more profit. You know, no one ever talks about the huge amount of American bases that circle China, and yet somehow it's China that's positioned as a threat towards us rather than it being us as a threat to them. I mean, I love this whole thing of China are anti-Western, you know, so therefore they're a threat to us, as though the Western capitalist system is the best system ever. And, you know, anyone who doesn't agree with it is weird. You know, it's like, I just find it really hilarious when we get this kind of thing through BBC and Channel 4. I think the reality is when we have a system where, you know, prime ministers are questioned on whether or not they press the button to not launch a nuclear weapon, and the answer that's expected is yes, absolutely, I would. But yet people like, for example, Jeremy Corbyn, who would say, well, actually, no, I'm not sure I would. It depend on the circumstances. I'd want to consider it first of all, and you know, because there's a lot of devastation that would cause a result. It's like, are you mad? Why would you think about it? So, you know, I really don't trust our media to be the judge and jury of whether it's right or wrong. I mean, to back up what Jane said, I mean, last week on Newsnight, that they had the whole thing about the International Criminal Court in The Hague issuing an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, even though they don't have the jurisdiction to actually go and implement it unless he steps into one of the countries which accept the International Criminal Court. So I think it's a little bit of stage management. I think I agree that I agree he needs to be held accountable for things done wrong. I completely agree with that, but it seems to be a little bit theatrics to me. And then also on Newsnight last week, a minute or so after that piece, they talked about the Iraq War, which of course 20 years ago last night that they invaded Iraq, and yet I don't see Tony Blair facing war crimes tribunal, even though dropped white phosphorus on Fallujah, for example. Using chemical weapons is a war crime, but yet no one's faced accountability for that. So I think this whole anti-Western thing, I think, is bollocks. I think the reality is that we have a system where as what Jane said is we are hypocritical in how we look at other countries that aren't the same as us. To quote what they say,
Thank you.
So, yeah.
So my second question to you, Neil, therefore, is the involvement in China a good thing for Ukraine, or does Ukraine need to worry about that?
Well, I'm not too sure about that. I mean, my initial thought would be that Ukraine will say no, it's not, because anyone that's willing to go and shake hands with Putin is certainly a dangerous person. But I think anyone that's willing to just sign over billions of pounds of weapons without any controls put in place whatsoever is also a dangerous person, which is exactly what he keeps wanting to happen. So I think anyone involved in this, to be honest with you, and on any side, I think there is no good side in a war. Whoever unless you are directly calling for peace, you're part of the problem, as far as I'm concerned. And I've not, there are reports that apparently Xi Jinping has called for peace. I've not seen those reports, but apparently has. But certainly not been top of the news. But when our news is trying to say that Xi Jinping is a threat, along with Putin is a threat to us, are they really going to put that top of the news? I'm not sure they are. But having said that, I've not looked for these reports either. I'll put that on record.
Yeah. I mean, there is a worry that what Putin wants is he wants China to supply weaponry. That's the danger.
They need to keep the military-industrial complex alive, don't they? It doesn't matter which side they go to; it's the military-industrial complex, one way or the other.
It's basically typical of a small country or a weaker country caught up in an international power play between East and West. Finally, Paul, the American reaction, of course, is one of fury. That they're accusing the Chinese of providing diplomatic cover for Putin's atrocities, that Xi Jinping has been validating a war criminal. I mean, have you any comment on that?
It's a bit rich, isn't it? Given their former presidents doing war crimes, given the fact that Obama murdered more people with drones than anyone in history, given that George W. Bush invaded Iraq and Afghanistan under false pretenses. These are things that, if you're gonna go around accusing people of these things, then maybe you should look closer to home to start off with, because maybe in this conflict, maybe there aren't any good guys, because we're very, very simplistic. We look at things like, well, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. Maybe there just aren't any good guys involved with this. Great Britain this morning, so I'm going to talk about our involvement in this and the danger that our government are putting us in. So we're talking about the Xi and Putin. They earlier had a press conference where Putin referenced the UK supplying Ukraine with depleted uranium rounds. Now that is a huge thing. Putin said he's going to have to take some action. So we are supplying the Ukraine's army with something that's related to nuclear. I know depleted uranium isn't exactly a nuclear bomb, but it's not exactly something really nice either. It's not like spreading some sort of aid or anything like that. These are really, really hardcore things that have supposedly according to Iraq's government, caused birth defects for years and years and years, after the Iraq conflict where the USA used depleted uranium rounds in there. The UK have escalated this by supplying those things. If you're going around supplying radioactive materials, whether or not that's for like their radioactiveness or whether it's because of the density, because they're better at destroying tanks or whatever, they've escalated this. And what if Putin really is this evil madman that they keep on talking about? What are they thinking? What are they thinking? Oh yeah, we're going to start going using nuclear material against you. Okay then, I've got nuclear material too, maybe Putin will say that. This is insanity. We need to take a massive step back. We need to think about what's going on, and peace needs to be on the agenda every single time. Because literally, like Neil's referenced it there, maybe Xi's referenced it a little bit, peace, but barely anyone is talking about making a peaceful resolution to this. Maybe because there's so much money involved, and maybe because everyone's been convinced that they're on the good side. There is no good side. Let's sort it out. Let's make peace.
Thank you. And to quote Jeremy Clarkson, on that bombshell, we bring that genuinely is a bombshell, isn't it? We bring the program to a close. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you to my amazing guests who have been, they've been 10% extra good today, haven't they? Admit it. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Neil. And thank you, Paul. Fantastic. Paul, I'm going to hand over to you now to say goodbye and just do the ad stuff at the end. I'm going to say goodbye to you all. God bless.
Thanks very much. Okay, so the politicals that you were talking about, or the fifth guest as we often like to refer to them, thank you so much. You have been absolutely brilliant. There's been so much brilliant stuff coming through that chat today, and that's helped the show, enhanced the show. So thank you to all of you. You're a massively important part of the show. Please spread the word, tell people to get involved, because the more of you get involved, the more of you watch and listen to and read independent media, the better. Subscribe to all the people who are part of the Independent Media Association, because we know we're being let down by the press. We know that our legacy media is letting us down and is telling us lies. This is factually accurate. It's been proven. We cannot go on like this. So support those things. That story that I was talking about earlier on about the depleted uranium came from Declassified UK. Give them a subscribe. Cow Daily, who's in the chat, give them a subscribe. Look at all these news sources that are about, because that's what we need to be doing. We need to be sharing our knowledge in our circles, because no one else is going to do this for us. No one's coming to save us. There is not a billionaire that comes along who has our agenda. We are not funded. We need to support one another, whether that's financially, whether that's simply turning up and giving a like to everything that people do. Support this media and promote this media wherever you can, and do whatever you can to make peace. Thank you for those of you who go on protests. Thank you for those of you who speak out against all these awful oppressions that are going on. You are good, solid people. You deserve to be happy. Thank you, everyone. Become a member of Socialist Think Tank at socialistthinktank.com and subscribe to all our stuff as well. It really is appreciated. Take care, everyone, and have a lovely, safe night.
Keep the red flag flying there.